For over 25,000 years, the galaxy believed it understood every threat the stars could produce. The Jedi had stood against the Sith through ages of war. The Republic had survived pirates, Mandalorian crusades, Separatist rebellions, and monsters that lurked within forgotten hyperspace routes. Entire civilizations had risen and fallen beneath the watchful current of the Force. Yet all those conflicts shared one simple truth. Every enemy belonged to the galaxy. Every war followed laws the Jedi could understand, no matter how terrible the battles became. But beyond the known dimensions that hyperspace could reach existed another reality where nature itself had evolved differently, where impossible creatures existed not because of the Force, but because evolution had forged living weapons large enough to challenge entire civilizations. On one forgotten ocean world during the height of the Clone Wars, the barrier between those realities was about to shatter. What emerged from the darkness would not seek conquest, diplomacy, or power. It would simply survive. And survival for such a creature would mean devastation for everything standing in its path. The Clone Wars had entered their third exhausting year. Republic fleets crossed thousands of hyperspace lanes every day while Separatist armadas challenged them across countless sectors. Entire generations of clone troopers knew nothing except endless campaigns beneath alien skies. Jedi Masters who had once served as peaceful guardians now directed orbital bombardments, coordinated planetary invasions, and watched young Padawans mature far too quickly amid the horrors of galactic war. Every victory purchased another battlefield. Every triumph merely delayed another crisis waiting somewhere beyond the next hyperspace jump. Even the Force itself felt strained beneath the unimaginable suffering spreading from system to system, and the Jedi Council found their visions becoming increasingly clouded by disturbances they could neither explain nor predict. If you enjoy cinematic Star Wars what-if stories that push the galaxy farther than it has ever gone before, make sure to like this video, share it with fellow Star Wars fans, leave a comment telling us which crossover invasion you'd like to see next, and most importantly subscribe to the channel so you never miss another journey into impossible corners of the Star Wars universe. The first warning came from a planet so isolated that even the Republic archives possessed little more than fragmented survey records. The ocean world designated KX-779 rested deep inside wild space, surrounded by unstable hyperspace currents that discouraged commercial traffic and military patrols alike. More than 98% of its surface lay beneath dark oceans thousands of meters deep. Jagged volcanic islands pierced the endless waters like broken teeth, while perpetual storms wrapped the atmosphere in towering walls of black clouds illuminated by constant lightning. Few explorers ever visited the planet twice. Fewer still remained long enough to study it. For centuries the world had remained silent. Then the storms changed. Republic deep space observatories detected gravitational fluctuations unlike anything previously recorded. Entire sections of space around KX-779 appeared to twist inward before violently expanding again. Hyperspace beacons throughout neighboring systems began transmitting contradictory coordinates. Navigation computers failed without explanation. Merchant vessels reported seeing impossible flashes of blue light beneath the clouds despite remaining safely in orbit hundreds of kilometers above the atmosphere. Several automated probes vanished completely, leaving only corrupted sensor recordings filled with violent bursts of electromagnetic interference and sounds resembling enormous heartbeats echoing through static. At first, Republic intelligence blamed Separatist experiments. Then they suspected a naturally occurring hyperspace anomaly. The Jedi Council remained unconvinced. Master Kit Fisto volunteered immediately to investigate. Few Jedi possessed greater experience operating within dangerous aquatic environments, and his calm curiosity often allowed him to uncover truths hidden beneath chaos. Accompanying him aboard the Republic cruiser Resolute's reconnaissance escort were Jedi Knight Aayla Secura, Commander Bly, and two companies of veteran clone troopers whose missions had carried them across some of the Clone Wars' most hostile battlefronts. Officially, they were investigating unusual gravitational disturbances that threatened nearby hyperspace lanes. Unofficially, the Council hoped to determine whether the strange phenomenon represented another piece of the growing darkness surrounding the Force itself. Their journey carried them far beyond the heavily traveled corridors of Republic space. Gradually, civilian traffic disappeared behind them. Familiar beacon signals faded into silence. Even the stars appeared strangely different, scattered across deeper darkness untouched by the bright webs of commerce connecting the core worlds. Commander Bly noticed that the clones spoke less frequently as the voyage continued. Veterans who had joked through artillery bombardments now found themselves watching the observation ports in uneasy silence, unable to explain why the emptiness beyond the hull felt somehow wrong. As the task force approached KX 779, every sensor aboard the lead cruiser activated warning alerts simultaneously. Gravity fluctuated without pattern. Electromagnetic fields pulsed through empty space. Entire regions of orbit bent light itself into impossible distortions. The stars ahead appeared stretched into spiraling ribbons before snapping violently back into place. Astromech droids continuously recalculated navigation solutions only to reject them seconds later as mathematical impossibilities. Nothing behaved according to known astrophysics. Kit Fisto closed his eyes and reached into the Force. Instead of calm currents flowing naturally through living beings, he sensed turbulence unlike anything he had encountered. It was not the cold malice of the dark side. It was not the serenity of the light. Rather, reality itself seemed unsettled, as though two oceans occupying different universes had begun crashing against one another beneath existence itself. The sensation spread outward for countless kilometers before vanishing into a point somewhere deep beneath the planet's largest ocean basin. The Jedi ordered an immediate descent. Republic LAT gunships fought hurricane force winds while lightning crawled across the clouds in branching rivers of brilliant blue energy. Rain hammered armored hulls with such violence that visibility dropped to mere meters. The ocean below churned with waves taller than Venator command towers, each swell illuminated by strange pulses rising from impossible depths. Every instrument aboard the gunships produced conflicting readings. Altimeters fluctuated wildly despite maintaining constant altitude. Magnetic compasses spun continuously. Even clone helmet displays flickered beneath waves of interference washing across the atmosphere. Eventually the storm opened. Below them lay a chain of volcanic islands surrounding a circular sea unlike anything visible elsewhere on the planet. The water glowed. Not from volcanic magma. Not from algae. But from enormous concentric rings of radiant blue energy expanding across the ocean's surface. Each pulse originated from the exact center of the basin. Each wave carried enough gravitational force to shake nearby mountains. Commander Bly stared through the cockpit canopy as floating boulders drifted several meters above the shoreline before crashing violently back into place. Trees bent inward toward empty air. Entire cliffs fractured without visible impact. The very fabric of gravity seemed to breathe. The clones established a perimeter while Jedi investigators advanced toward the shoreline. Every few seconds another pulse surged across the water, accompanied by a deep resonance that could be felt through boots pressing against volcanic stone. The air smelled sharply of ozone mixed with seawater and sulfur rising from geothermal vents scattered throughout the island. Strange blue lightning arced between the clouds and the glowing sea without ever touching the ground, creating towering columns of shimmering energy that vanished as suddenly as they appeared. Republic scientists deployed sensor arrays around the basin. Their readings became increasingly impossible. Energy signatures resembled neither hyperspace nor any known reactor technology. The anomaly generated power exceeding that of capital ship reactors. Spatial dimensions within its center fluctuated continuously. Distance itself refused to remain constant. One probe reported descending 1 kilometer before transmission ceased. Another claimed to fall forever despite remaining visible just beneath the glowing surface. No equation could explain the contradiction. Kit Fisto stepped closer. The Force whispered warnings. Not of evil. Of intrusion. As though something unimaginably distant had finally found a weakness within the walls separating realities. Without warning, every sensor aboard every Republic vessel entered catastrophic overload. The glowing rings accelerated. The sea began rotating. Water hundreds of meters deep spiraled upward into an enormous vortex reaching toward the storm clouds. Lightning erupted continuously around its edges while gravity intensified so violently that clone troopers struggled to remain standing. Gunships anchored to the ground groaned beneath invisible pressure. Orbiting cruisers reported tidal distortions affecting the entire planet. Then the center of the vortex split open. Not exploded. Opened. A circular wound formed within reality itself. Beyond it existed no stars. No hyperspace. Only endless darkness streaked with violent blue energy. The wound widened further. Something moved inside. At first the clones believed they were observing shifting rock formations. Then they realized the mountains were moving. An immense claw emerged from the impossible darkness. It slammed into the ocean with enough force to generate tsunamis racing across the basin. Another followed. Then an enormous armored head rose slowly through the dimensional rupture. Its skin resembled black volcanic stone layered over living muscle. Massive dorsal spines glowed with deep sapphire light as seawater cascaded from scales larger than Republic tanks. Twin golden eyes surveyed an entirely unfamiliar universe with the instinctive awareness of an apex predator entering unexplored territory. Every movement radiated incomprehensible weight. Every breath released clouds of steam that rolled across the shattered sea like gathering thunderheads. The creature continued rising. 200 feet. 300. 500. It showed no sign of stopping. Clone troopers who had stood firm against legions of battle droids found themselves frozen before a living mountain. Even the Jedi struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. The Force surrounded the being, yet it did not flow through it naturally. Instead, the creature seemed almost disconnected. A living organism born according to laws that existed entirely outside the familiar harmony of the galaxy. Commander Bly finally whispered the only words any soldier could manage. This was not a beast. This was a catastrophe. The dimensional wound continued widening behind the colossal creature, blue energy pouring into the Clone Wars galaxy like floodwaters bursting through a shattered dam. And somewhere beyond that impossible breach, more shadows moved. The impossible creature had barely completed its ascent from the glowing wound in reality before every military instinct aboard the Republic task force took control. Commander Bly barked orders across every clone frequency while LAT gunships lifted into the storm-filled skies, their engines roaring against the endless thunder rolling across KX-779's oceans. Venator-class warships repositioned in orbit, locking heavy turbolasers onto the massive life form below despite every officer understanding that no targeting computer had ever been designed to calculate firing solutions against a living organism nearly the size of a mountain. Even seasoned clone veterans, who had marched without hesitation against impossible Separatist fortresses, found themselves staring upward at something that challenged every assumption they had ever held about warfare. Battle droids could be destroyed. Capital ships could be disabled. Sith Lords could bleed. But the creature standing before them seemed less like an enemy and more like a force of nature that had accidentally wandered into the Clone Wars. Kit Fisto felt the Force swirl violently around the giant, but its currents behaved in ways that unsettled him deeply. Every living being resonated naturally within the living Force, creating subtle harmonies that experienced Jedi could sense even across great distances. This creature produced no such harmony. It existed within the Force because all life did, yet its presence felt strangely isolated, almost insulated from the familiar currents that connected the galaxy. The sensation resembled touching a stone submerged beneath flowing water. The Force moved around it rather than through it. Whatever world had created such an organism obeyed laws far older and stranger than anything recorded inside the Jedi archives. The colossal beast suddenly released a deafening roar that shattered the storm itself. The sound rolled across the ocean with physical force, flattening forests, triggering landslides across volcanic cliffs, and sending waves racing outward in every direction. Clone troopers instinctively covered their helmets as the shockwaves struck their defensive positions. Republic gunships were thrown violently sideways despite maximum engine output. Sensor dishes collapsed beneath the pressure while communication frequencies dissolved into static. The roar carried no malice. no intelligence. It was simply the territorial declaration of an apex predator suddenly finding itself inside an unfamiliar ecosystem. Then the creature moved. Every footstep fractured volcanic rock beneath thousands of tons of unimaginable weight. Entire sections of coastline collapsed into the sea as the giant advanced away from the dimensional breach, instinctively seeking stable ground. It ignored the Republic forces entirely, paying no attention to gunships circling overhead or clone formations establishing defensive positions across the island. Instead, its massive head turned slowly toward the horizon, where distant atmospheric currents carried scents unlike anything it had ever encountered before. Abundant. Close. Across the ocean, a civilian research colony rested upon one of KX-779's larger island chains. The station housed barely 12,000 scientists, engineers, and support personnel studying the world's unique geothermal activity. They had no planetary shield, no heavy defenses. The Clone Wars had never reached this isolated system. Until now. Commander Bly immediately recognized the creature's trajectory. Within seconds, evacuation orders flooded every available frequency. Civilian transports scrambled desperately from landing platforms while maintenance crews abandoned equipment where it stood. Families raced toward underground shelters that had been built to withstand hurricanes, not monsters hundreds of feet tall. Children looked toward the horizon where the storm itself seemed to be walking closer with every passing heartbeat. Kit Fisto ignited his emerald lightsaber. Not because he believed the elegant weapon could stop something of such size, but because hope often began with impossible acts. Republic artillery opened fire. Heavy cannons from orbit unleashed brilliant green lances of energy that struck the Kaiju squarely across its armored shoulders. Explosions blossomed against black scales with enough force to vaporize conventional battle tanks. Gunships added torrents of laser fire while ground artillery saturated the coastline beneath relentless bombardment. Smoke swallowed the creature. The island shook continuously beneath detonations powerful enough to erase cities. For several long seconds, nobody could see the target. Then two enormous golden eyes emerged through the smoke. The Kaiju continued walking. Its armored hide glowed red where the heaviest impacts had landed, but no wound appeared beneath the scorched surface. Molten fragments of damaged scales simply cooled as new layers shifted naturally into place. The bombardment had irritated it. Nothing more. Commander Bly felt genuine disbelief for perhaps the first time since Geonosis. Entire Republic armored divisions possessed less durability than this single organism. Before additional firing solutions could be calculated, the ocean itself erupted behind the first creature. A second-dimensional pulse surged through the breach. Then another. The glowing vortex widened even farther as two additional shapes climbed from impossible darkness beyond reality. The first newcomer possessed a long serpentine body covered with crimson armor plates lined by glowing blue veins that pulsed rhythmically beneath its skin. Massive fin-like structures extended from its spine as it slithered through the ocean with terrifying speed, cutting through enormous waves as though they barely existed. The second was even larger. Broad shoulders supported four heavily muscled arms ending in enormous claws capable of crushing Republic walkers like toys. Thick bone-like protrusions covered its chest while twin tails lashed violently behind its towering frame, each impact sending tidal waves racing across the surrounding islands. Republic tactical officers stared silently at their displays. One impossible creature had become three. The dimensional rupture remained open. Kit Fisto realized with growing horror that this was not an invasion fleet. It was wildlife. Far above the battlefield, another force emerged unexpectedly from hyperspace. Separatist frigates. General Worm Loathsome had received fragmented intelligence suggesting Republic. Experimental weapons research inside wild space and had dispatched a task force hoping to capture whatever new technology Chancellor Palpatine intended to hide from Count Dooku. Instead, the Separatist commander arrived directly above the unfolding nightmare. His bridge crew required only moments to understand the situation. Three gigantic life forms. Republic fleet already engaged. Unknown energy phenomenon. No tactical database contained recommendations for such circumstances. Battle droid commanders prepared to attack automatically. Then the first kaiju reached the civilian colony. Its enormous foot descended through the central landing district. Buildings disappeared instantly beneath thousands of tons of living weight. Towers collapsed outward like scattered toys. Fire and steam erupted together as geothermal reactors ruptured beneath crushed infrastructure. Thousands of terrified civilians fled through streets, splitting apart beneath constant tremors while emergency sirens vanished beneath the continuous roar of collapsing metal and concrete. The creature never slowed. It simply continued walking. Not out of cruelty. Not from hatred. It scarcely noticed the tiny beings fleeing beneath its feet. Kit Fisto launched himself toward the collapsing city alongside Republic gunships desperately attempting rescue operations. Clone troopers landed amid falling debris, escorting panicked civilians toward evacuation shuttles while Aayla Secura deflected collapsing support beams with the Force, buying precious seconds for trapped survivors to escape. Every rescue demanded impossible courage because no battlefield doctrine existed for confronting a disaster that ignored armies entirely. Suddenly, the second kaiju entered the city from the harbor. Its serpentine body smashed directly through the spaceport, sending parked freighters tumbling into burning fuel depots. Massive jaws closed around a communications tower before hurling the wreckage hundreds of meters across the settlement. One swipe of its armored tail flattened entire city blocks, creating expanding walls of dust and shattered durasteel that consumed everything in their path. The Republic forces found themselves fighting two natural disasters simultaneously. Then the Separatists opened fire. General Lothsom understood immediately that the Republic would soon lose the colony. More importantly, if these creatures survived, they would threaten Separatist territory next. His munificent frigates descended aggressively into low orbit, unleashing concentrated heavy turbolaser batteries against the advancing giants. Blue plasma crashed across the kaiju in continuous waves. One creature stumbled. The Republic bridge officers watched in surprise. Heavy sustained orbital fire actually slowed them. Not enough, but enough. Commander Bly seized the opportunity instantly. Without hesitation, he transmitted a priority tactical channel to the Separatist flagship. There were no negotiations. No political speeches. No discussion of ceasefires. Only battlefield mathematics. If they continued fighting each other, everyone on the planet would die. For perhaps the first time since the Clone Wars began, Republic clone commanders and Separatist tactical droids coordinated fire against a common target. Venators attacked from one vector. Munificent frigates attacked from another. Crossing streams of turbolaser fire converged upon the towering monsters with devastating precision. The bombardment forced one kaiju backward into the ocean while the second roared in visible frustration as dozens of explosions rippled across its armored body. Republic ARC-170 starfighters and Separatist vulture droids swarmed together through the smoke-filled skies, pilots ignoring decades of hatred because survival suddenly outweighed ideology. For one fleeting moment, the Clone Wars ceased to exist. There were only survivors. The third kaiju, however, had never entered the colony. It remained beside the breach, watching. Its enormous head tilted slowly toward the battle as if observing unfamiliar behavior. Deep within instincts evolved in another universe, patterns were already forming. The strange flying machines attacked from range. The tiny creatures cooperated despite obvious differences. Energy weapons caused discomfort but not significant injury. The beast learned. Without warning, it released a pulse of bioluminescent energy along the ridges covering its spine. The dimensional breach responded. Blue lightning exploded across the ocean. The vortex widened once again. Far beyond the glowing wound between universes, larger shadows stirred within the darkness. Much larger. And for the first time, Kit Fisto understood that the monsters devastating KX-779 were not the true threat. They were merely the first creatures to wander through an open door. The battle for KX-779 lasted less than 6 hours, yet by the time the final evacuation transports escaped into hyperspace, the Clone Wars had entered an entirely different age. Republic engineers estimated that more than 70% of the colony had been obliterated despite the combined efforts of Jedi Knights, clone battalions, and even the unlikely intervention of Separatist warships. The three colossal Kaiju had eventually retreated not because they had been defeated, but because the dimensional breach that had birthed them began collapsing under its own unstable gravitational forces. One by one the monsters returned to the churning sea surrounding the fracture in reality, disappearing beneath black waters that continued to glow with impossible blue energy. Their departure brought no celebration. Entire cities lay in ruins. Thousands had died beneath creatures that had never intentionally hunted them. Worse still, every survivor understood instinctively that the monsters had not truly been stopped. They had merely left. The distinction haunted everyone who had witnessed the invasion. Across Coruscant, emergency sessions consumed both the Jedi Council chamber and the Republic Senate. Military analysts replayed sensor recordings thousands of times, attempting to understand how biological organisms had survived punishment equal to sustained orbital bombardment. Every scientific model failed. The creatures possessed regenerative abilities beyond anything catalogued in Republic xenobiology. Their organs functioned unlike any known vertebrate or arthropod species. Their cellular structures absorbed tremendous kinetic and thermal energy before redistributing damage throughout layered tissues that constantly regenerated themselves. Republic laboratories quickly abandoned attempts to classify them within existing biological families. They simply created an entirely new designation. The name spread rapidly through military channels until it became official terminology across the Republic fleet. Fortunately, the Republic had not emerged entirely empty-handed. The retreating monsters had left behind enormous fragments of flesh, shattered armor plating, severed claws, and biological residues scattered across KX-779's devastated coastlines. Clone recovery teams, still uneasy after fighting creatures larger than capital ships, carefully collected every surviving sample before transporting them under maximum security to specialized research facilities hidden throughout the core worlds. For the first time, the Republic possessed tangible evidence of an enemy unlike anything in galactic history. Unfortunately, they were not the only ones. Separatist salvage vessels had quietly entered the system immediately after the Republic evacuation. While official reports claimed Count Dooku wished only to verify the Republic's findings, reality proved far more complicated. General Grievous personally oversaw the recovery of enormous kaiju bone fragments from beneath the shattered remains of the colony. Techno-Union engineers eagerly dissected organic tissue while Geonosian bioengineers proposed disturbing possibilities involving biological warfare. Even General Grievous himself found the creatures fascinating. Their sheer physical resilience appealed to his mechanical obsession with strength. Looking across the enormous armored skeleton of one severed limb, the cyborg general almost seemed insulted that such magnificent biological engineering had evolved naturally rather than through deliberate technological enhancement. Yet even he admitted something deeply unsettling. No cybernetic improvements appeared necessary. The creatures had already become nearly perfect weapons. Meanwhile, inside the hidden laboratories beneath Coruscant's Military Science Directorate, Republic researchers uncovered discoveries that challenged centuries of biological understanding. The kaiju were not simply large animals. They had been designed. Every chromosome displayed impossible levels of deliberate genetic optimization. Redundant organs ensured survival after catastrophic injury. Entire muscle groups functioned as secondary circulatory systems capable of maintaining blood flow despite devastating trauma. Neural pathways adapted dynamically during observation itself, subtly reorganizing whenever scientists introduced unfamiliar stimuli. More disturbingly, none of their genetic code contained evidence of natural evolutionary history. Species always carried scars of their ancestry. The kaiju possessed none. They had simply appeared, built from the ground up by an intelligence that understood biology more thoroughly than the Republic understood engineering. When Master Shak Ti reviewed the findings, she felt the same unease that had gripped Plo Koon inside the abandoned tunnels weeks earlier. The monsters were not nature. They were products. Weapons. Someone had manufactured them. The obvious question became infinitely more terrifying. Far beyond Republic jurisdiction, hidden beneath the poisonous clouds of Enel Huda, entirely different conclusions emerged. The Hutt cartel saw opportunity. Within days, representatives from nearly every major Kajidic dispatched discrete acquisition teams toward the devastated frontier systems. Publicly, they claimed humanitarian concerns and disaster relief. Secretly, they competed viciously for ownership of Kaiju biological material that could revolutionize medicine, military technology, or profitable genetic engineering. Credits flowed faster than information. Entire black market economies formed almost overnight. Fragments of Kaiju armor sold for fortunes. Biological tissue disappeared into hidden laboratories owned by wealthy crime lords. Mercenary companies accepted contracts protecting research convoys transporting samples across Hutt space. Nobody cared where the monsters had originated. Everyone cared what fortunes their biology might create. Black Sun moved even faster. Unlike the Hutts, Prince Zizor's criminal empire recognized that whoever controlled Kaiju research might dominate galactic commerce for generations. Corporate espionage erupted across the core worlds as Black Sun assassins infiltrated Republic laboratories while simultaneously bribing Separatist officials for classified scientific reports. Industrial secrets vanished nightly. Researchers disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Entire cargo freighters carrying biological samples simply failed to arrive at their destinations. The Clone Wars had already transformed the galaxy into a marketplace of violence. Now Kaiju biology became its newest currency. Legitimate corporations proved little better. Executives within the intergalactic banking clan quietly funded private expeditions into wild space despite explicit Republic warnings. The Commerce Guild sought mining equipment capable of harvesting Kaiju's skeletal material. Pharmaceutical conglomerates invested billions into studying regenerative cellular structures that promised immortality for wealthy clients. Every boardroom reached the same conclusion. If someone else discovered the secrets first, they would control the future. The ethical consequences barely entered discussion. Only profits. While corporations fought over scattered remains, the Jedi pursued an entirely different mystery. Inside the preserved tissue recovered from KX-779, Jocasta Nu identified microscopic structures that no Republic scanner initially recognized. They resembled organic communication nodes woven directly into every cell, functioning almost like miniature hyperspace transmitters operating through dimensions unknown to modern physics. Master Obi-Wan Kenobi watched silently as the strange tissue continued pulsing despite complete separation from its original organism. Weeks had passed. It remained alive. More astonishingly, each pulse followed mathematically precise intervals. "It isn't dying," one scientist whispered. "It's waiting." Republic technicians increased scanning sensitivity. The results froze the laboratory. The tissue emitted faint signals. Not through conventional radio frequencies. Not through subspace communications. The transmissions somehow vanished beyond measurable reality itself. Whatever intelligence had created the Kaiju maintained contact with them across impossible distances. Even after death, Yoda closed his eyes. The Force offered troubling impressions. The signal carried purpose. Not instinct. Someone listened. Someone answered. Someone existed beyond the dimensional barrier itself. The implications rippled across the council chamber like invisible shockwaves. If the Kaiju were weapons, then somewhere beyond known reality existed the civilization responsible for creating them. An enemy intelligent enough to manipulate life itself. An enemy capable of opening stable fractures between universes. An enemy that had not yet entered the galaxy. Elsewhere, the mystery deepened unexpectedly. Astromech survey probes investigating the original breach recorded something impossible before their destruction. For 0.8 seconds, long-range imaging penetrated beyond the dimensional rupture. The recovered footage required extensive enhancement before becoming recognizable. Not stars. Not space. Cities. Enormous structures rose across landscapes unlike anything inside the Star Wars galaxy. Towering black spires twisted organically into crimson skies illuminated by strange blue suns. Rivers of glowing biological fluid flowed between impossible architecture that seemed grown rather than constructed. Countless massive organisms drifted overhead like living aircraft while gigantic factories continuously produced unfamiliar life forms from immense organic vats. The footage ended abruptly. Every probe ceased functioning simultaneously. Yet the evidence remained undeniable. The Kaiju came from somewhere. That somewhere possessed civilization. Republic intelligence assigned the unknown builders a temporary designation. Precursors. Nobody knew their true name. Nobody knew whether they considered themselves conquerors, scientists, or gods. Only that they manufactured monsters. And possessed technology, or biology, capable of violating reality itself. On Sereno, Count Dooku watched the classified footage alone inside his private chambers. Unlike most Separatist leaders, he focused not upon the monsters. He studied the city beyond the breach. Its architecture lacked ornamentation. Every structure served biological function. No art. No culture. Only efficiency. The civilization disturbed him because it reminded him of something unexpectedly familiar. The Sith. Not in appearance. In philosophy. Life reduced to utility. Power elevated above individuality. Entire ecosystems engineered toward singular purpose. For perhaps the first time since embracing Darth Sidious, Dooku wondered whether the galaxy already contained enough monsters without inviting another civilization built entirely upon domination. His thoughts were interrupted by Sidious himself. The holographic image appeared without warning. Even through layers of carefully controlled expression, Dooku noticed subtle tension hidden beneath his master's usual confidence. Sidious asked only one question. "What have you learned?" Dooku answered honestly. "The creatures are not invading." Sidious remained silent. "They are scouts." The hologram flickered almost imperceptibly. Dooku continued studying the footage as he spoke. If someone engineered such organisms, then eventually their creators will come. Sidious offered no reassurance. Because privately, he had reached exactly the same conclusion. Within the hidden laboratories beneath Coruscant's Imperial District, facilities even the Senate believed abandoned, Palpatine reviewed Sith records accumulated over centuries. Ancient holocrons described legendary civilizations existing outside conventional reality, races capable of shaping flesh like artists sculpted stone, entities that viewed entire galaxies as experimental ecosystems. Most Sith dismissed those stories as allegory. Palpatine no longer did. For the first time in decades, Darth Sidious encountered an opponent whose ambitions exceeded even his own. He intended to rule one galaxy. Someone beyond reality seemed prepared to harvest countless worlds. Far away, beyond every hyperspace lane ever mapped by explorers, the dimensional corridor remained open. Not wide enough for invasion. Not yet. Within impossible biological laboratories larger than planets, towering alien architects observed the data flowing back from their first living weapons. Every heartbeat, every injury, every weapon impact, every tactical response employed by the Republic and Separatists. The Kaiju had fulfilled their true purpose. Not conquest, reconnaissance. Across endless chambers filled with gestating monstrosities, ancient intelligences silently evaluated the galaxy awaiting them. Atmospheric composition, native technology, population density, military resistance, energy weapons, artificial intelligence. The Force. They did not understand the mysterious energy field surrounding this new universe, but they had encountered unknown variables before. Every civilization believed itself unique. Every civilization eventually adapted. Or died. The first breach had never been intended to conquer the Star Wars galaxy. It had merely opened the door. Now, at last, the architects beyond reality knew exactly what waited on the other side. And they had already begun designing something far worse than Kaiju. The revelation that the Kaiju had been engineered rather than evolved fundamentally changed the war before a single additional creature emerged from the breach. Until that moment, the Republic and the Separatists had believed they were confronting an unpredictable natural disaster, an invasive species that had wandered accidentally into the galaxy. Now the horrifying truth stood before them. Somewhere beyond reality existed an intelligence capable of designing living weapons, studying entire civilizations through biological reconnaissance, and patiently preparing worlds for conquest long before the true invasion ever began. Even the Clone Wars, already the largest conflict in generations, suddenly seemed insignificant beside an enemy that viewed galaxies as little more than territory awaiting cultivation. No one understood that truth more completely than Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. Alone within his private office overlooking the endless skylanes of Coruscant, Palpatine replayed every report collected from KX-779. His expression never changed, but behind the calm smile carefully crafted over decades of political manipulation, Darth Sidious analyzed the crisis with ruthless precision. Every victory he had engineered since Naboo depended upon one simple principle. Intelligent beings could always be manipulated. Senators desired influence. Corporations desired profit. Jedi desired peace. Even Count Dooku believed himself pursuing justice. Every faction possessed ambitions that could be twisted into weapons against one another. The Kaiju possessed none. They could not be bribed. They could not be deceived. They could not be intimidated. Most dangerously of all, they could not be corrupted by promises of greater power because they had never desired power in the first place. Sidious realized something he had not experienced since discovering the existence of the Jedi Order as a child. He had encountered an enemy entirely outside his understanding. His Sith teachings offered no strategy for controlling creatures that acted according to biological programming rather than emotion. The dark side thrived upon fear, anger, hatred, ambition, and pride. Those passions became chains that skilled Sith could exploit with terrifying efficiency. The Kaiju knew only instinct. Instinct could not be seduced. That single realization forced Sidious to abandon years of careful planning. For the first time since orchestrating the Clone Wars, the conflict itself became secondary. Survival came first. The Republic's destruction could wait. If the galaxy fell to the beings beyond the breach, there would be no empire left to rule. Without informing either the Jedi Council or the Senate, Palpatine quietly began rewriting the strategic priorities of the Republic military. New offensives appeared across frontier sectors bordering wild space. Additional Venator fleets received emergency deployment orders. Planetary defense budgets doubled almost overnight. Officially, these measures responded to increasing Separatist aggression. In reality, every movement had been calculated to strengthen the regions most vulnerable to another dimensional incursion. Even the Jedi failed to notice the subtle manipulation. To them, the Republic simply appeared more committed to protecting isolated systems. Only Palpatine understood that every fleet reposition toward wild space bought precious time. Across the galaxy, Count Dooku noticed the changes almost immediately. The former Jedi Master had spent years studying his master's political genius, learning to recognize patterns hidden beneath apparently random decisions. Sidious never acted impulsively. Every Senate speech, every military deployment, every carefully leaked intelligence report served a purpose invisible to everyone except those who knew where to look. Recently, however, those patterns had changed. Republic fleets no longer concentrated solely upon defeating the Separatists. Instead, they increasingly abandoned tactically valuable worlds in favor of distant frontier systems possessing little military significance. Dooku found the inconsistency deeply unsettling. He summoned General Grievous to Sereno under strict secrecy. The towering cyborg arrived carrying updated battle projections that only deepened Dooku's suspicions. The Republic is weakening its central sectors, Grievous observed coldly, projecting holographic maps across the chamber. Several supply routes now remain almost undefended. Dooku studied the glowing displays carefully. If you commanded the Republic, he asked quietly, would you willingly expose your industrial heartland? Never. Then why does Chancellor Palpatine? Grievous offered no answer. Because none existed. Dooku dismissed the general before turning his attention toward intelligence gathered from Black Sun informants operating inside Coruscant. The reports confirmed what battlefield deployments already suggested. The Chancellor had become obsessed with wild space. Not publicly. Privately. Something had frightened Darth Sidious. The possibility should have been impossible. Yet every new report strengthened the conclusion. For perhaps the first time since accepting the title of Sith Apprentice, Dooku wondered whether his master truly remained in control. Meanwhile, the Republic's greatest scientific minds struggled desperately to understand the Precursors before another breach appeared. On Kamino, the cloning facilities temporarily diverted some of their finest geneticists away from producing clone troopers and toward analyzing Kaiju tissue. Lama Su himself supervised the project, fascinated by organisms whose biological sophistication exceeded even Kaminoan engineering. The conclusions disturbed him profoundly. Whoever designed the Kaiju possessed complete mastery over adaptive evolution. Every cell functioned almost like an independent laboratory, capable of rewriting itself in response to environmental threats. Radiation exposure triggered immediate resistance. Extreme temperatures activated dormant proteins. Physical trauma accelerated tissue reinforcement. The creatures literally improved while fighting. One Kaminoan scientist quietly summarized the findings. If they survive an attack once, they become harder to kill forever. The implications spread rapidly through Republic High Command. Future encounters would become exponentially more dangerous. Every battle taught the Kaiju something. Every victory against them became less likely than the last. Master Yoda sensed the same disturbing pattern through the Force. Meditating within the ancient halls of the Jedi Temple, he reached outward toward the growing disturbances surrounding wild space. Countless futures branched endlessly before him, each clouded by uncertainty unlike anything he had experienced during the Clone Wars. Normally, even when the dark side obscured precise outcomes, the Force revealed emotional currents guiding events toward possible destinies. The Kaiju created no such currents. They resembled stones dropped into flowing water. The Force acknowledged their existence, but could not fully predict them. That mystery unsettled Yoda more than any Sith plot ever had. Elsewhere, the criminal underworld embraced chaos. Black Sun scientists began illegally combining Kaiju tissue with cybernetic enhancement programs despite catastrophic failure rates. Several hidden laboratories vanished after experimental organisms escaped containment. Entire asteroid mining stations simply ceased transmitting after smuggled biological samples unexpectedly regenerated into living predators. The Hutts proved no wiser. On Nal Huda, one ambitious Kajitic attempted to breed Kaiju cells inside native swamp predators, hoping to create unstoppable guardian beasts for cartel territories. Within 48 hours the facility had been consumed. Nothing survived. The project remained officially classified, though whispered rumors spread rapidly throughout Hutt space. Even monsters could create monsters. Far beyond the galaxy, inside the vast crimson skies of the Precursors dimension, enormous biological foundries never ceased their work. Information gathered by the first Kaiju continued arriving through living neural conduits spanning realities. Republic tactics, Separatist technology, planetary defenses, atmospheric chemistry. Every detail flowed into colossal organic processing structures where new genetic blueprints evolved continuously. The galaxy believed it had survived the first attack. The Precursors knew it had merely completed the opening experiment. Their next creations would not simply be larger. They would be smarter, faster, purpose-built for civilization rather than reconnaissance. As the living factories continued reshaping impossible genomes, one conclusion echoed across their immense biological intelligence. The inhabitants of this galaxy resisted effectively. Adaptation would be required. Back on Coruscant, Palpatine stood alone before the Senate windows, watching thousands of speeders streak through the endless cityscape below. For decades he had believed himself the galaxy's supreme predator. Now he understood that something older had noticed his existence. Something that neither feared the Sith nor recognized the Republic. For the first time in his life, Darth Sidious looked toward the stars not with ambition, but with caution. As fear spread across the Republic, the Jedi Order turned away from fleets and battle maps and sought answers in the only place that still held thousands of years of forgotten memory. Deep beneath the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, beyond the public archives studied by Padawans and Knights, existed vaults so ancient that many council members had never entered them. These repositories contained fragmented records recovered from ruined temples, extinct civilizations, and long-forgotten Jedi expeditions that had ventured beyond the known boundaries of the Republic. Most were considered historical curiosities rather than practical knowledge. Yet after the discoveries surrounding the Kaiju and the mysterious Precursors, Master Yoda ordered every restricted archive opened. If the galaxy had encountered anything remotely similar before, even 20,000 years earlier, the Jedi needed to know. Jocasta Nu oversaw the monumental search herself. Hundreds of archivists sorted through brittle star charts, damaged holocrons, faded expedition journals, and crystalline memory matrices whose creators had vanished millennia before the Republic was founded. Days became weeks as scholars pieced together fragments that had never before seemed connected. One described an unexplored ocean world where enormous creatures had emerged from glowing storms before disappearing without explanation. Another recorded an ancient hyperspace expedition that had discovered entire moons stripped of animal life despite showing no evidence of war or natural disaster. Most reports ended abruptly, dismissed by later historians as exaggerations or myths born from frightened explorers encountering unfamiliar wildlife. Individually, none of the accounts appeared significant. Together, they formed a pattern stretching back almost 15,000 years. The Jedi had seen echoes of this nightmare before. Master Obi-Wan Kenobi studied one recovered holocron whose creator had belonged to the Order during the earliest centuries of the Old Republic. The recording showed a weary Jedi Master describing immense creatures that rose from alien seas after strange disturbances in space itself. The beings had ignored settlements at first, instead wandering coastlines as though searching for something beyond the planet. Eventually they disappeared into another shimmering distortion in reality. The Jedi who recorded the event admitted that the Order never understood what they had witnessed. The Council at the time buried the report, not because they feared the creatures, because they feared the implications. The Force had offered almost no warning before the monsters arrived. Master Windu reviewed another damaged archive recovered centuries earlier from an abandoned temple in wild space. Its surviving passages described living mountains that walked between impossible storms and warned future Jedi never to pursue them beyond the broken edge of creation. The language was poetic, yet repeated references to dimensional fractures and colossal beasts sounded disturbingly familiar after the events on KX 779. Even more troubling were the missing pages. Someone long ago had deliberately removed portions of the record. Whether to conceal the truth or because they contained dangerous knowledge, no one could determine. Inside the council chamber, the atmosphere grew heavier with every new discovery. Normally, the Jedi relied upon the Force not merely as a source of power, but as guidance. Even when confronting unknown dangers, the Force revealed currents of possibility, flashes of destiny, and emotional impressions that allowed experienced masters to anticipate catastrophe before it unfolded. That certainty had shaped the Order for thousands of generations. Now it was failing them. Yoda spoke little during those meetings, but every master recognized the concern in his ancient eyes. "The future," he murmured at last, "broken it is." Mace Windu frowned. "The dark side clouds our vision." Yoda slowly shook his head. No. The distinction carried enormous weight. The dark side had always obscured the future through deception, fear, and manipulation. Sidious himself had hidden beneath the Jedi's perception for years by exploiting that imbalance. But this felt fundamentally different. The Force itself seemed uncertain. Master Plo Koon described what he had experienced beneath the abandoned colony weeks earlier. When he touched the strange living organism buried beneath the planet's surface, he had not sensed hatred or malice. Those emotions belonged to individuals. Instead, he encountered something vast enough that individual intentions ceased to exist. An ecosystem. A consciousness measured not in personalities but in biological purpose. Even the living force struggled to interpret it. The realization sent an uncomfortable silence through the chamber. For generations, the Jedi had believed the Force connected every living thing. What if something had evolved beyond that connection? Not outside the Force entirely, but differently. Master Shak Ti proposed an unsettling theory. The Force surrounds this galaxy because life here evolved within it. These creatures did not. No one immediately challenged the idea. If the Kaiju and their creators originated in another dimension rather than another galaxy, perhaps they had developed beneath entirely different universal laws. They were alive, certainly, but their relationship with existence itself might differ so profoundly that the Force could perceive them only as incomplete echoes. Like hearing thunder through water. Present, powerful, yet impossible to interpret clearly. To test the theory, several Jedi volunteered for deep meditation. Across the temple, masters entered powerful Force trances simultaneously, focusing their awareness toward the distant breach beyond wild space. Their combined perception reached farther than any individual Jedi could achieve, extending through hyperspace toward the scar in reality that still pulsed beneath alien oceans. At first they sensed nothing unusual. Then fragments appeared. Not visions. Sensations. Immense biological structures drifting through endless crimson skies. Organic towers larger than mountains. Rivers of living tissue. Thunderous heartbeats echoing across impossible distances. The images arrived broken and incomplete, vanishing before the Jedi could fully understand them. One master compared the experience to trying to observe another galaxy through cracked transparisteel. Pieces emerged. Never the whole picture. The meditation ended abruptly when several participants collapsed from exhaustion. Master Kit Fisto recovered first. "I've never felt anything like it," he admitted quietly. "It wasn't resisting us. It simply wasn't speaking the same language." That conclusion disturbed the council more than outright hostility would have. An enemy governed by hatred could be understood, negotiated with, manipulated, redeemed. An intelligence fundamentally alien to the Force represented something entirely unprecedented. Meanwhile, Republic scientists unknowingly confirmed the Jedi's fears through completely different methods. Long-range observatories surrounding the breach recorded subtle gravitational fluctuations occurring at mathematically precise intervals. Initially dismissed as natural instability, the patterns gradually revealed deliberate structure. Someone on the other side was conducting measurements. Every energy discharge from Republic scanners received corresponding responses. Every hyperspace jump near the anomaly triggered slight dimensional distortions. The Precursors were not merely observing. They were learning. Their understanding of the Star Wars galaxy increased daily. Across Hutt space, rumors surrounding the monsters transformed into superstition. Smugglers refused profitable routes near wild space regardless of payment. Entire pirate fleets abandoned frontier territories after discovering derelict vessels drifting without crews. Bounty hunters who once feared only Jedi and rival mercenaries began speaking instead of glowing storms and giant shadows beneath alien oceans. For perhaps the first time in living memory, fear united criminals who normally trusted nothing except credits. Count Dooku noticed the changing mood as well. His intelligence network had become remarkably effective at tracking Republic fleet movements, yet recently he found himself paying greater attention to civilian shipping patterns. Refugees fled frontier sectors before official evacuation orders arrived. Independent traders altered hyperspace routes without explanation. Somehow ordinary citizens sensed danger before governments acknowledged it. Civilizations often recognized approaching catastrophe instinctively. Dooku wondered if the Republic's people had already begun accepting what their leaders still refused to say aloud. The war against the Separatists no longer represented the galaxy's greatest concern. Far beyond reality, inside the impossible domain of the Precursors, enormous living observatories absorbed the fragmented impressions produced by the Jedi's meditation. The Force had reached outward. The Precursors noticed. Ancient biological intelligences analyzed the unfamiliar energy field surrounding the galaxy. Unlike the Kaiju, which functioned purely as weapons, these beings possessed patience measured across civilizations. They did not fear unknown phenomena. They adapted to them. Vast organic computation chambers began reshaping future organisms in response to newly acquired information. Neural structures expanded. Sensory organs multiplied. Biological tissues capable of interacting with unfamiliar energy signatures slowly developed within gestation chambers stretching for hundreds of kilometers. The Force had attempted to understand them. Instead, it had revealed itself. Back inside the Jedi Temple, Yoda stood alone before the endless lights of Coruscant. For centuries he had trusted that the Force would always illuminate a path, no matter how dark the times became. Now the path ahead disappeared into unfamiliar shadows. The Force had not abandoned the Jedi. But neither could it fully guide them against enemies born beyond the natural balance of their own universe. For the first time in thousands of years, the Guardians of Peace faced an adversary whose future even the Force could glimpse only in shattered fragments. And somewhere beyond the breach, those fragments were already becoming clearer to the enemy. The Clone Wars had taught every civilization in the galaxy how to wage war against intelligent enemies. Republic admirals anticipated Separatist fleet movements through probability analysis. Jedi generals sensed danger through the Force before blaster bolts were fired. Clone commanders adapted to changing battlefields with remarkable discipline, while Separatist tactical droids calculated millions of combat scenarios every second. Every military doctrine rested upon one simple assumption. The enemy could be predicted because the enemy wanted something recognizable: territory, resources, political influence, or survival. The Kaiju shattered that assumption completely. They did not invade planets to occupy them. They did not destroy cities to demoralize populations. They simply emerged, devastated everything in their path, and then continued toward whatever instinct compelled them onward. Every battle became an exercise in slowing an unstoppable natural disaster rather than defeating an opposing army. Within 2 standard months after the first breach appeared, similar dimensional fractures began opening across multiple frontier sectors. None matched the original anomaly in size, but each produced violent gravitational disturbances that tore apart orbital traffic and generated storms unlike anything recorded in galactic history. Entire oceans rose hundreds of meters before crashing back onto coastlines. Planetary magnetic fields fluctuated wildly. Communications dissolved into static while hyperspace routes twisted unpredictably around the growing distortions. Republic scientists quickly realized the horrifying truth. The first breach had not been unique. It had merely been the beginning. The next Kaiju did not emerge alone. On the water world of Kelries, 3 massive Category 3 creatures erupted simultaneously from beneath a dimensional fracture spanning nearly 20 kilometers. Each beast towered above the coastal mountain ranges, their armored bodies glistening beneath sheets of crimson lightning. One resembled a colossal 6-legged predator covered in crystalline bone plating. Another possessed enormous wing-like membranes that allowed it to glide across the ocean despite its impossible mass. The third moved through the sea itself, disappearing beneath the waves before erupting beneath Republic defense platforms with explosive force. Clone garrisons never had the opportunity to establish defensive lines. Entire bases vanished beneath walls of water generated by the creature's movement. Venator-class star destroyers bombarded the shoreline with heavy turbolasers powerful enough to flatten cities. Yet the monsters continued advancing through explosions that would have annihilated conventional armies. Republic commanders finally accepted that traditional battlefield tactics meant nothing against organisms measured not in meters, but in mountains. Across the galaxy, reports multiplied faster than the Senate could process them. Another Category 2 Kaiju surfaced near an independent mining colony protected by Mandalorian mercenaries. 2 more devastated pirate strongholds deep inside Hutt space. One unexpectedly emerged beneath a Separatist manufacturing complex, reducing an entire droid foundry to molten debris before disappearing back into the sea. For the first time since the Clone Wars began, the Kaiju demonstrated absolute indifference toward political allegiance. Republic. Separatist. Neutral. Criminal. Every civilization represented little more than fragile structures standing in the path of something vastly larger. The Hutts reached that conclusion faster than most governments. Ordinarily, the great crime lords exploited every galactic crisis for profit, selling weapons to both sides while smugglers transported supplies through dangerous territories. This time, however, entire smuggling networks simply ceased to exist. Shipping routes vanished overnight as monstrous sightings spread through the Outer Rim. Even hardened spice captains refused contracts leading anywhere near confirmed breach zones regardless of payment. Jabba the Hutt quietly convened representatives from rival Khajiits on Enel Huda. The meeting produced something previously considered impossible: cooperation. Rather than competing over shrinking trade routes, the Hutts pooled intelligence regarding Kaiju sightings and financed enormous sensor networks throughout their territories. Information suddenly became more valuable than spice. Meanwhile, Black Sun saw opportunity instead of caution. Its leadership began purchasing Kaiju remains recovered after Republic bombardments, believing the monster's extraordinary biological resilience could revolutionize biotechnology, armor production, and illegal weapons research. Entire laboratories hidden throughout the Outer Rim received shipments of enormous claws, regenerative tissue samples, and crystalline skeletal fragments harvested from dead Kaiju. Few researchers understood exactly what they were studying. Even fewer survived prolonged exposure. Mandalorians reacted differently than either the Republic or the criminal underworld. To them, gigantic monsters represented neither economic opportunity nor political catastrophe. They represented the greatest hunt imaginable. Clan leaders across scattered Mandalorian protectorates began assembling specialized hunting companies equipped with the heaviest weapons available. Ancient basilisk war droids emerged from forgotten armories. Experimental Beskar harpoons capable of penetrating starship hulls were reforged. Veterans who had spent decades fighting Jedi accepted contracts, defending frontier colonies abandoned by the Republic. Honor demanded they face worthy prey. The Kaiju offered no shortage of worthy prey. Bo-Katan Kryze herself led one expedition to rescue civilians trapped on an oceanic refinery platform surrounded by a Category 3 Kaiju. Instead of attempting to kill the beast directly, Mandalorian gunships harassed it with concentrated missile volleys while armored warriors descended onto its back using jetpacks. The plan bordered on insanity. It succeeded. Beskar explosive charges detonated across vulnerable sensory organs identified through previous Republic research, temporarily blinding the creature long enough for evacuation ships to escape. The Kaiju survived. Thousands of civilians survived as well. Stories of Mandalorians riding monsters across burning oceans spread throughout the galaxy almost immediately. Even clone troopers regarded the accounts with disbelief. Republic High Command carefully analyzed every recorded engagement. Patterns gradually emerged. Turbolasers remained effective only when concentrated upon specific biological weaknesses. Ion weapons proved almost useless because the Kaiju possessed no electronics. Proton torpedoes inflicted tremendous damage but lacked the sustained firepower necessary to stop larger specimens before they reached population centers. Simply increasing firepower no longer guaranteed victory. Admiral Wolf Yularen proposed a radically different approach. Instead of treating Kaiju as ground targets, the Republic would fight them like hostile capital ships. Entire Venator battle groups began coordinating synchronized orbital bombardments designed to focus dozens of heavy batteries onto precise anatomical locations identified through battlefield observation. Reconnaissance starfighters mapped muscular movement while clone spotters transmitted targeting data directly to orbiting destroyers. For the first time, naval warfare extended seamlessly from space into planetary combat. Victory required perfect coordination between fleets, ground forces, and Jedi commanders. Even then, success remained uncertain. Separatist tacticians reached similar conclusions independently. General Grievous possessed little interest in protecting civilian populations, but Kaiju repeatedly destroyed valuable droid factories and supply depots before either side could relocate them. Count Dooku authorized unprecedented tactical revisions, ordering Lucrehulk battleships to remain in high orbit rather than committing directly above planetary battlefields. Mobile artillery platforms replaced stationary fortresses. Entire droid armies became bait designed to lure kaiju into predetermined kill zones. The strategy appeared brutally efficient, until the monsters adapted. One Category 4 specimen unexpectedly ignored thousands of battle droids and instead climbed a volcanic ridge to attack orbital defense cannons, threatening the breach itself. Republic observers realized with growing unease that the kaiju possessed far greater instinctive intelligence than previously believed. They prioritized strategic objectives. Somehow, they recognized threats. Elsewhere, bounty hunters discovered entirely new professions. Rather than tracking fugitives, elite hunters accepted contracts escorting refugee convoys through kaiju-infested sectors. Cad Bane, Bosk, Embo, and dozens of lesser-known professionals found themselves protecting civilians instead of pursuing targets. The work paid extraordinarily well, but credits alone did not explain the sudden change. The galaxy had become dangerous enough that survival itself generated profit. Smugglers also adapted. Han Solo had not yet become famous, but countless captains like him transformed aging freighters into evacuation vessels capable of slipping through collapsing hyperspace corridors surrounding active breaches. They carried senators one day, farmers the next, asking few questions so long as fuel tanks remained full. Heroes emerged in unlikely places. So did opportunists. On Coruscant, the Senate struggled desperately to maintain the illusion of control. Entire sectors demanded military assistance simultaneously. The Republic simply lacked enough fleets. Every reinforcement sent toward one breach left another vulnerable. Palpatine publicly emphasized unity while privately studying military reports with increasing fascination. The kaiju were forcing unprecedented cooperation between enemies. That cooperation threatened his carefully engineered clone wars. Each successful joint operation between Republic and Separatist commanders weakened decades of Sith manipulation. Yet allowing worlds to fall risked total galactic collapse before his own plans reached completion. For perhaps the first time in his life, Darth Sidious confronted events he could influence but not fully direct. The Force offered him no simple solution. Deep beneath one newly formed breach, far beyond the reach of Republic scanners, something even larger stirred. The Precursors observed every engagement through living sensory organisms hidden within the dimensional fractures. Each destroyed kaiju provided valuable information. Every Republic bombardment, every Mandalorian hunting tactic, every Separatist artillery barrage became data absorbed by minds existing beyond ordinary space. Failure did not discourage them. Failure educated them. Inside enormous biological construction chambers, new organisms slowly developed. Heavier armor appeared across growing skeletal frameworks. Sensory organs evolved specifically to detect orbital targeting lasers. Muscle fibers strengthened to withstand repeated turbolaser impacts. Some embryos even developed protective membranes capable of dispersing concentrated energy weapons before impact. The Republic believed it was learning how to fight kaiju. The Precursors were learning far faster. Near the frontier, Admiral Yularen watched another refugee convoy disappear into hyperspace while exhausted clone crews reloaded turbolaser batteries scarred from continuous combat. Around him floated wreckage from Republic cruisers, Separatist frigates, Mandalorian gunships, pirate vessels, and civilian transports destroyed during the same desperate battle. For the first time since the Clone Wars began, those shattered ships no longer symbolized opposing sides. They represented one civilization struggling together against something that regarded them all as equally insignificant. The age of fighting each other was ending. The age of hunting giants had only just begun. The Republic celebrated its first true victories against the kaiju with cautious optimism. Entire sectors that had once expected annihilation now stood because coordinated fleets, Jedi strike teams, Mandalorian hunters, and Separatist artillery had learned how to bring down monsters previously believed unstoppable. Military academies throughout the core worlds began rewriting tactical doctrine almost overnight. Specialized anti-kaiju battle groups replaced traditional invasion fleets. Orbital bombardments became increasingly precise rather than overwhelmingly destructive. Clone engineers designed new heavy weapons specifically calibrated to penetrate the dense bioarmor covering the creatures' bodies, while Jedi Masters compiled extensive battlefield records identifying vulnerable joints, sensory organs, and neurological centers that lightsabers could exploit. For the first time since the breaches appeared, many senators quietly allowed themselves to believe the galaxy was adapting faster than its new enemy. They failed to understand one terrifying truth. Every kaiju that died was not merely a battlefield loss. It was a lesson carried back to minds existing beyond reality itself. Within the impossible dimension inhabited by the Precursors, no defeat was permanent. Every biological sample recovered through surviving organisms, every sensory memory carried by retreating kaiju, and every cellular fragment left behind after battle became part of an ever-expanding genetic archive. Entire oceans of living tissue flowed through continent-sized breeding chambers where countless organisms dissolved into nutrient seas before emerging again in entirely new forms. The Precursors possessed no factories, laboratories, or assembly lines. Evolution itself served as their greatest weapon. What natural selection required millions of years to accomplish, they achieved within days. Each Republic victory simply accelerated the creation of something far more dangerous. The first evidence appeared on the devastated world of Kelris. Republic reconnaissance teams returned expecting to find the corpses of several previously defeated Category 3 kaiju. Instead, they found enormous organic cocoons stretching across the ruined coastline like grotesque monuments. The structures pulsed with slow rhythmic movement, surrounded by rivers of thick crimson fluid that flowed across shattered cities before disappearing into the sea. Clone scouts cautiously approached, believing the creatures inside remained dormant. Then every cocoon split open simultaneously. The monsters that emerged resembled no kaiju encountered before. Their armored hides had changed from layered chitin into overlapping crystalline plates capable of refracting energy across their entire bodies. Instead of absorbing turbolaser impacts directly, the new armor scattered tremendous portions of the incoming energy harmlessly across dozens of interconnected plates. Republic orbital strikes that had once crippled Category 3 specimens now produced little more than brilliant flashes dancing harmlessly across their surfaces. Admiral Yularen watched the engagement unfold from orbit with growing disbelief. Heavy Venator batteries unleashed coordinated volleys powerful enough to reduce mountains into molten craters. The kaiju barely slowed. Republic officers initially assumed inaccurate targeting. Sensor readings proved otherwise. The creatures themselves had evolved. Far above the battlefield, engineers recalculated firing solutions again and again, yet every bombardment produced diminishing returns. The enemy had fundamentally changed. Elsewhere, Jedi discovered an even more disturbing adaptation. On the forest moon of Endeavor, Master Luminara Unduli confronted a newly emerged Category 4 kaiju while evacuating thousands of civilians through dense woodland valleys. Drawing upon every lesson learned during previous campaigns, she used the Force to propel herself toward the creature's neck before driving her emerald lightsaber deep into what should have been vulnerable connective tissue. Instead of slicing cleanly through flesh, the blade encountered extraordinary resistance. The kaiju roared, not from unbearable pain, but from irritation. Its hide contained strange mineralized fibers that rapidly dispersed the intense thermal energy generated by the lightsaber. Though the weapon still penetrated, it advanced only centimeters before surrounding tissue hardened around the glowing blade itself. The monster had developed biological insulation against one of the galaxy's most iconic weapons. Luminara narrowly escaped after clone gunships distracted the beast with concentrated missile strikes, but her reports stunned the Jedi Council. Lightsabers remained effective. They were no longer decisive. The Force itself had not weakened. The enemy had simply evolved to survive it. When those findings reached Coruscant, Master Yoda closed his eyes for a long moment. The living Force, he quietly reflected, learns through life. No Jedi present wished to consider the implication. If life adapted through the Force, what happened when something beyond the natural order evolved without sharing its balance? Anakin Skywalker refused to accept that adaptation alone could determine the war. Leading the 501st Legion alongside Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex, he launched a daring operation against another breach threatening several industrial worlds. Rather than relying solely upon heavy bombardment, Anakin divided his forces into numerous fast-moving assault groups supported by ARC-170 starfighters flying dangerously close to the Kaiju themselves. If the monsters had adapted to predictable tactics, then unpredictability would become the Republic's greatest weapon. Initially, the strategy worked beautifully. Starfighters slipped between towering limbs faster than the enormous creatures could react. Clone commandos deployed explosive charges directly into breathing vents while Jedi used the Force to manipulate collapsing terrain around advancing monsters. 3 Kaiju fell within hours. Then the 4th appeared. Unlike every previous specimen, this Category V giant possessed dozens of independently moving ocular clusters distributed across its entire body. It no longer relied upon a forward field of vision. Every direction became its front. Republic starfighters suddenly found themselves pursued with terrifying precision. Massive biological spines launched from the creature's back at supersonic velocity, tracking interceptors through impossible aerial maneuvers. Entire squadrons vanished beneath storms of living projectiles before clone pilots even understood they were under attack. Ahsoka barely escaped when one spine tore through the wing of her Delta-7 starfight. Only extraordinary reflexes and the Force allowed her to crash land safely several kilometers away. Watching from orbit, Admiral Yularen recognized another horrifying pattern. The Kaiju had specifically evolved to counter Republic air superiority. Obi-Wan Kenobi encountered similar developments elsewhere. Defending an ocean refinery alongside Commander Cody, he observed a massive amphibious Kaiju deliberately submerging whenever orbital bombardments began, using the surrounding sea as an enormous thermal shield before surfacing moments later in completely different locations. Republic targeting computers lost lock repeatedly as the creature exploited underwater terrain that conventional sensors struggled to penetrate. "It isn't fleeing," Obi-Wan quietly remarked while watching tactical displays. "It's learning." Commander Cody understood immediately. "No, General." He stared toward another contact suddenly appearing beneath the waves. "They're teaching each other." That realization spread rapidly throughout Republic High Command. The Kaiju no longer appeared to evolve independently. Adaptations developed on one battlefield soon appeared across creatures emerging hundreds of light-years away. Knowledge itself had become biological. Every engagement strengthened the entire invasion. Meanwhile, Separatist scientists reached equally alarming conclusions. Experimental ion cannons, initially dismissed because Kaiju lacked electronics, had recently demonstrated limited effectiveness against specialized neurological tissues controlling muscular coordination. Count Dooku immediately authorized expanded production. Within weeks, newly emerged Kaiju displayed thick electromagnetic organs capable of absorbing and dispersing ionized energy before it reached vulnerable nervous systems. The adaptation appeared almost instantaneous. General Grievous responded with rare honesty during one military briefing. "We destroy them. They improve. We improve. They improve faster." Even battle droids calculated the statistical implications with growing pessimism. Across Hutt space, Black Sun researchers suffered catastrophic consequences for their earlier experiments. Living Kaiju tissue preserved inside secure laboratories suddenly began regenerating despite complete cellular death recorded days earlier. The samples merged into grotesque masses that consumed researchers before bursting through containment facilities. Entire criminal installations vanished beneath rapidly expanding organic infestations that continued growing until orbital bombardment sterilized the surrounding regions. The galaxy finally understood why Republic scientists insisted every fragment of Kaiju biology be incinerated immediately after battle. Nothing from the Precursors truly remained dead for long. Within the Jedi Temple, the Council convened another emergency session. Ancient wisdom offered little guidance against an enemy rewriting biology faster than any civilization could develop strategy. Master Plo Koon proposed smaller, more flexible strike groups capable of adapting during battle instead of relying upon predetermined doctrines. Kiadimundi argued for concentrating overwhelming fleet power before new adaptations emerged. Mace Windu studied battlefield recordings in thoughtful silence. Finally, Yoda spoke. "Against monsters," he said slowly, "fight we have. But monsters alone, these are not. They become what we teach them to become." The chamber fell silent. Every Republic victory carried hidden consequences. Every successful tactic guaranteed its eventual obsolescence. Anakin wrestled with that reality more than anyone. Throughout the Clone Wars, he had consistently relied upon instinct, creativity, and aggressive maneuvering to overcome stronger opponents. Those qualities had made him one of the Republic's greatest generals. Now even brilliance seemed temporary. Every innovative strategy merely purchased time before the Precursors incorporated it into the next generation of Kaiju. Standing beside Ahsoka aboard the Resolute, Anakin watched clone technicians repair starfighters damaged during yet another costly engagement. "We keep changing," Ahsoka observed quietly. "So do they." Anakin looked toward the stars where distant breaches glowed like infected wounds across the galaxy. "No," he replied grimly. "They're changing because of us." Far beyond those stars, inside living worlds that pulsed with unimaginable biological activity, the Precursors continued observing countless battlefields simultaneously. They had measured the Republic's fleets. They had studied Jedi reflexes. They had analyzed Mandalorian armor, clone discipline, Separatist machines, and orbital warfare. The next generation already waited within immense gestation chambers. Some possessed armor capable of resisting concentrated turbolaser fire. Others carried organs that distorted targeting sensors across entire battlefields. A few displayed strange neural structures unlike anything previously observed, organs designed not merely to survive the Force, but to disrupt the instincts of those who wielded it. The war was no longer a contest between civilization and monsters. It had become an evolutionary arms race. And evolution had never cared which side deserved to survive. The illusion that the Republic could contain the invasion ended in a single day, remembered forever as the Day of Shattered Horizons. For months the galaxy had convinced itself that the Kaiju emerged only from isolated breaches hidden beyond the frontier, dangerous but ultimately manageable through overwhelming military force and carefully coordinated evacuations. Entire sectors had reorganized around that assumption. Republic admirals established permanent anti-Kaiju patrols along wild space. Separatist defense fleets withdrew from less important campaigns to reinforce vulnerable border systems. Mandalorian mercenary clans built profitable contracts hunting colossal monsters across remote colonies. Even ordinary civilians began believing that although the war against the Precursors would be long and bloody, it remained a distant conflict fought somewhere beyond civilization's heart. That comforting illusion died when space itself fractured across dozens of systems simultaneously. From the bridges of Republic cruisers to the observation towers of Coruscant, astronomers watched impossible crimson tiers open across the stars. The breaches had multiplied. The invasion had entered its next phase. Unlike the first unstable portals discovered months earlier, these new breaches displayed terrifying stability. Vast rings of distorted gravity remained permanently suspended in space, surrounded by immense storms of electromagnetic lightning that stretched thousands of kilometers across the void. Entire hyperspace routes collapsed as navigation beacons malfunctioned beneath impossible gravitational distortions. Merchant convoys vanished attempting emergency jumps through suddenly unstable corridors. Worlds that had never considered themselves anywhere near the front lines awoke to discover enormous dimensional wounds hanging in orbit above their skies. Every observatory throughout the Republic transmitted identical emergency reports. The galaxy was no longer facing isolated incursions. It was becoming surrounded from within. The first monsters emerged only minutes later. Category 4 Kaiju crossed through the dimensional gateways in organized waves rather than isolated appearances. Some swam through the vacuum itself using immense biological propulsion organs that distorted gravity around their bodies. Others resembled towering quadrupeds covered in armored ridges capable of reflecting concentrated turbolaser fire into surrounding escort vessels. Behind them came airborne leviathans whose wings generated atmospheric shockwaves powerful enough to devastate orbital stations before they even entered planetary airspace. Every previous encounter suddenly seemed like reconnaissance. The true invasion had finally begun. On the frontier world of Vaskar Prime, an entire Republic defense fleet disappeared within 43 minutes. Admiral Coburn had assembled 3 Venator-class star destroyers, dozens of escort frigates, and nearly 400 starfighters around what intelligence believed to be a minor breach. Instead, 7 Category V Kaiju emerged almost simultaneously. The creatures moved with terrifying coordination despite their immense size. One wrapped its massive tail around a Venator before crushing the warship apart like brittle metal. Another unleashed concentrated streams of corrosive bioplasma that burned directly through shield generators before dissolving entire flight decks. Clone pilots launched wave after wave of V-Wings and ARC 170s into the assault, only to encounter swarms of smaller airborne organisms that intercepted every attack with suicidal precision. By the time surviving vessels escaped into hyperspace, Vaskar Prime had ceased transmitting entirely. Reports like that flooded Coruscant faster than military analysts could process them. Entire sectors demanded immediate reinforcements. Planetary governors pleaded for evacuation fleets. Senators abandoned political rivalries in favor of desperate emergency funding bills that passed unanimously within hours. The Clone Wars, once considered the defining crisis of the age, suddenly appeared insignificant beside an invasion threatening every civilization regardless of allegiance. Within the Jedi Temple, Masters gathered before an enormous tactical projection showing hundreds of confirmed Kaiju sightings spreading like a disease across the Outer Rim. The holographic map changed almost continuously as new breaches formed faster than scouts could catalog them. This is no longer a frontier war, Mace Windu observed grimly. It is becoming a galactic extinction event. Even Yoda found little comfort within the Force. The visions remained fragmented, overwhelmed by countless converging futures collapsing beneath the weight of constant destruction. Every possible path contained unimaginable loss. Victory itself had become increasingly difficult to perceive. Elsewhere on Coruscant, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine watched those same reports with emotions carefully hidden behind a mask of grave concern. Publicly, he became the calm voice guiding the Republic through unprecedented catastrophe. Privately, Darth Sidious recognized an opportunity greater than anything the Clone Wars alone could have provided. Fear had accomplished what years of political manipulation never fully achieved. Entire star systems now begged for centralized authority capable of coordinating survival itself. Emergency powers expanded once again. Regional governors accepted direct military oversight. Civilian manufacturing shifted entirely toward wartime production. The Senate authorized indefinite suspension of numerous constitutional protections in the name of planetary security. Each decree strengthened Palpatine's control while appearing completely necessary. For the first time since engineering the Clone Wars, he no longer needed to manufacture fear. The Kaiju provided it freely. Count Dooku noticed the transformation almost immediately. Meeting secretly aboard his flagship with senior Separatist commanders, he studied intercepted Senate transmissions detailing Palpatine's expanding authority. None of the measures appeared unreasonable given the circumstances. Yet together they formed a pattern Dooku recognized all too well. My master adapts quickly, he reflected quietly. General Grievous folded his mechanical arms. The Republic grows stronger. Dooku's expression darkened. No. The Chancellor grows stronger. For the first time since becoming Darth Tyrannus, genuine uncertainty entered his thoughts. Sidious had always promised the Clone Wars would end with carefully orchestrated victory and the birth of a new order. But this invasion threatened every calculation. If civilization itself collapsed beneath the Precursors, then Sith ambitions meant nothing. Dooku began wondering whether his master still pursued domination or merely survival. Military necessity accomplished what centuries of diplomacy never had. Republic and Separatist fleets began fighting together openly. The first official combined operation occurred above the industrial world of Corta 6, where 3 simultaneous breaches threatened to overwhelm both Republic shipyards and Separatist manufacturing complexes. Rather than waste precious hours exchanging fire with one another, opposing admirals established emergency communications and coordinated defensive formations against the incoming monsters. Venator-class star destroyers fought alongside munificent frigates. Clone pilots flew escort missions protecting Separatist artillery cruisers. Droid fighters shielded Republic evacuation convoys. Every tactical doctrine developed during 3 years of brutal war dissolved beneath the reality that neither faction possessed sufficient strength independently. Anakin Skywalker found the experience surreal. Standing upon the bridge of the Resolute, he watched Republic officers calmly exchange targeting data with commanders they had spent years trying to destroy. "This feels wrong," Rex admitted. Anakin nodded. "It also feels necessary." Obi-Wan, listening nearby, offered a weary smile. Perhaps necessity has accomplished what diplomacy never could. The battle itself became the largest fleet engagement in galactic history. More than 700 capital ships converged around Corta 6 as dozens of Kaiju emerged through expanding breaches. Turbolasers illuminated space with continuous rivers of emerald and crimson fire while biological plasma carved glowing scars across the darkness. Entire cruiser formations maneuvered like schools of fish around monsters hundreds of meters long. Starfighters darted between towering limbs, striking exposed sensory organs before disappearing through storms of debris. Yet even this unprecedented alliance barely held. Every Kaiju destroyed seemed replaced by another. Several Category V organisms demonstrated horrifying new abilities. One generated gravitational distortions that pulled starfighters directly into its massive jaws. Another released clouds of microscopic airborne organisms that rapidly consumed exposed hull plating before clone damage control teams could respond. The Precursors had not only increased numbers. They had accelerated adaptation yet again. Mandalorian forces entered the conflict unexpectedly. Led by veteran clan leaders seeking neither Republic favor nor Separatist alliance, dozens of heavily armed warships emerged from hyperspace carrying specialized boarding teams equipped with experimental Beskar harpoons and explosive cable launchers. Rather than engage Kaiju directly through conventional bombardment, Mandalorian warriors landed upon the creatures themselves, driving enormous charges into joints and exposed musculature before escaping seconds prior to detonation. Their methods appeared reckless. They also worked. Entire sections of colossal monsters collapsed beneath coordinated internal explosions. Watching from nearby gunships, clone officers quickly incorporated similar tactics into future operations. Elsewhere, bounty hunters and smugglers exploited the chaos with predictable enthusiasm. Some evacuated civilians for extraordinary prices. Others looted abandoned worlds moments before Kaiju landfalls. Hut cartels established profitable supply networks transporting ammunition, fuel, and medical equipment to isolated defense fleets. Even organized crime adapted faster than many governments. Weeks passed beneath relentless warfare. The combined fleet prevented complete collapse around Corta 6, but at staggering cost. Hundreds of warships lay shattered across orbit. Millions of clone troopers, battle droids, and civilian personnel had perished. Entire planets remained scarred beyond recognition. Still the breaches remained open. Still more Kaiju emerged. Within secret laboratories hidden beneath Coruscant, Palpatine accelerated projects previously considered years from completion. Advanced clone contingencies expanded dramatically. Experimental superweapons received unrestricted funding. Loyal officers quietly received promotions over more independent-minded commanders. Publicly, every decision strengthened the Republic's ability to survive. Privately, each one positioned Palpatine for absolute authority once the inevitable political transformation arrived. The Senate no longer questioned whether emergency powers should continue. Citizens demanded they expand further. Security had become more valuable than liberty. Fear proved stronger than democracy. Across the stars, Anakin sensed the galaxy changing in ways no battlefield victory could reverse. The Republic still fought for survival, but something fundamental had shifted. Governments centralized. Military authority expanded. Ordinary people increasingly accepted extraordinary restrictions simply because extinction stood outside their windows. Obi-Wan sensed it as well. The war against the Kaiju may save civilization, he remarked quietly while observing another convoy depart Coruscant. But I fear it may also transform civilization into something we no longer recognize. Far beyond every battlefield, the Precursors observed the growing concentration of military power with detached biological curiosity. Their objective had never been merely to destroy planets. They intended to force entire civilizations into predictable patterns of adaptation before consuming them completely. The breaches continued widening. Larger shadows moved beyond the crimson storms. Creatures greater than anything yet encountered slowly approached the thresholds between universes. The first wave had tested the galaxy. The second had broken its confidence. The third would decide whether the Star Wars galaxy remained the home of civilization, or became another forgotten ecosystem harvested by beings that had conquered realities long before the Republic ever dreamed of the stars. The largest breach ever witnessed by the Republic no longer resembled a storm in space. It had become a wound stretching across hundreds of kilometers, suspended above the shattered ocean world where the first Kaiju had entered the galaxy months earlier. Reality itself twisted around its edges. Purple lightning crawled across dimensional fractures while gravitational tides bent nearby starlight into impossible spirals. Entire Venator-class star destroyers looked insignificant beside the monstrous vortex, and every sensor aboard the assembled fleets reported contradictory readings that changed by the second. Some instruments claimed the breach possessed infinite depth. Others insisted it occupied no measurable space at all. Astromech droids repeatedly shut themselves down after calculating impossible geometric patterns hidden within the anomaly's expanding walls. Outside the dimensional scar, the greatest fleet ever assembled continued its desperate struggle against the invasion. Republic Venators fought shoulder to shoulder with munificent frigates that only weeks earlier had been their mortal enemies. Providence-class dreadnoughts exchanged targeting data with clone admirals. Mandalorian gauntlet fighters darted between formations of ARC-170 starfighters while Hutt-funded mercenary gunships protected civilian evacuation convoys instead of raiding them. Even now, Category V Kaiju climbed across crippled warships in low orbit, their armored limbs tearing through durasteel while torrents of glowing acid spilled into the vacuum like rivers of emerald fire. Every victory outside the breach bought only minutes, because more monsters continued emerging from the dimensional wound without pause. Within the command center aboard the flagship Resolute, the final assault force gathered around a holographic projection of the breach. There would be no second attempt. Republic scientists believed the dimensional network coordinating every invasion organism originated on the opposite side. If the galaxy hoped to end the war permanently, someone had to cross into the enemy's universe and destroy the source directing every Kaiju entering the Clone Wars. The volunteers represented allies who should never have stood together. Anakin Skywalker studied the swirling dimensional gateway with unwavering determination. Beside him stood Obi-Wan Kenobi, calm despite knowing the odds favored none of them returning. Master Yoda leaned upon his cane, his ancient eyes fixed upon currents within the Force that grew increasingly difficult to interpret near the breach. Mace Windu remained silent, sensing both triumph and catastrophe surrounding the coming mission. Across the chamber stood Count Dooku, no longer hiding the fact that his loyalty to Darth Sidious had fractured. He had not abandoned the Separatists, nor embraced the Republic. Instead, he had reached the uncomfortable conclusion that survival outweighed ideology. No one fully trusted him. No one could afford not to. Palpatine himself approved the operation with carefully measured confidence. Publicly, he declared that the Republic's greatest heroes would strike the decisive blow against the invaders. Secretly, another calculation unfolded beneath his reassuring smile. Whether they succeeded or failed, every possible outcome strengthened his position. If they died, the Jedi Order would lose its greatest defenders. If they returned victorious, The Republic would still emerge exhausted enough to demand stronger centralized authority. His empire waited beyond either future. Only one possibility disturbed him. If the Precursors possessed knowledge capable of threatening Sith ambitions, then perhaps even Darth Sidious stood upon uncertain ground. The strike force departed aboard heavily modified assault transports shielded by experimental gravity stabilizers developed from captured Kaiju tissue. As they crossed the event horizon, every familiar law of hyperspace vanished. Stars disappeared. Time stretched. Sound itself became fluid. For one impossible instant, each traveler witnessed countless alternate realities reflected within the dimensional currents. Anakin glimpsed Coruscant consumed beneath oceans of alien flesh. Obi-Wan saw civilizations that had never known war. Yoda witnessed galaxies already reduced to silent skeletons drifting through eternal darkness. Dooku saw an empire spanning thousands of galaxies before collapsing beneath monsters too numerous to count. Then the visions ended. They emerged into a universe that no living being from the Star Wars galaxy had ever imagined. The realm beyond the breach was not empty space. It was alive. Entire planetary systems had been transformed into biological machinery. Vast membranes connected moons like veins carrying glowing rivers of genetic material between worlds. Organic towers larger than mountains floated unsupported through crimson skies filled with spores that shimmered like stars. Oceans pulsed rhythmically as though they were the beating hearts of incomprehensibly large organisms. Living continents slowly shifted across one another while titanic skeletal structures stretched into darkness beyond sight. Nothing resembled civilization. Everything resembled cultivation. The Precursors had not built cities. They had grown an ecosystem designed solely to manufacture conquest. Republic scientists had theorized the Kaiju were engineered weapons. Reality proved even worse. The Kaiju were merely cells within an organism spanning entire dimensions. As the strike force advanced through the grotesque landscape, resistance emerged immediately. New Kaiju, unlike any encountered during the invasion, descended from towering biological spires. These creatures moved with terrifying precision rather than blind rage. Their hides reflected lightsaber energy. Their circulatory systems dispersed ion charges harmlessly through crystalline organs. Others generated localized gravity distortions that sent clone gunships tumbling from the sky despite operating within an atmosphere that barely obeyed recognizable physics. They've learned everything, Obi-Wan realized as another beast effortlessly adapted to clone artillery that had destroyed its predecessor only moments earlier. Months of war had become months of observation. Every battlefield, every tactic, every weapon, every force technique. The Precursors had studied them all. The assault became a brutal advance through an evolving nightmare. Clone commandos detonated thermal charges beneath towering bioconstructs while Mandalorian volunteers unleashed volleys of rockets into airborne predators that resembled dragons woven from muscle and coral. Anakin carved through armored Kaiju with explosive bursts of force-enhanced speed, but even he noticed the creatures adapting during battle. Ones that survived a single encounter returned moments later, anticipating his movements with unnerving accuracy. Yoda reached deep into the living force, seeking guidance beyond instinct. Instead, he discovered silence. Not emptiness. Resistance. The Force flowed through every living thing within the Star Wars galaxy because life had evolved alongside it for millions of years. The Precursors had evolved elsewhere. Their biology resonated according to principles entirely alien to the Force's natural harmony. They exist outside the song, Yoda whispered. Hear them, the Force cannot. For the first time in countless centuries, the oldest Jedi Master accepted a truth that unsettled him profoundly. The Force remained powerful, but it was not universal. At the center of the biological realm stood something vastly larger than every surrounding structure. It resembled a living planet suspended within an immense cocoon of luminous tissue. Billions of organic tendrils connected it to countless breaches opening across dimensions. Every Kaiju invasion, every evolutionary adaptation, every tactical response flowed through this immense biological intelligence. It was not an individual. It was the command nexus. the heart of the Precursor civilization. As the strike force approached, the world awakened. Its surface unfolded like an opening flower. From within emerged beings unlike the Kaiju. Graceful, horrifyingly intelligent. Their translucent bodies shimmered with flowing patterns of living circuitry while countless eyes reflected dimensions instead of light. They carried no weapons because they required none. Around them, gravity bent effortlessly, reshaping the battlefield with subtle gestures that collapsed mountains into rivers of liquid stone. These were the architects, the creators, the precursors themselves. Communication did not come through spoken language. Instead, every member of the strike force experienced identical thoughts pressing directly into their minds. Your galaxy is abundant. Your civilizations are temporary. Your resistance is statistically admirable. Your assimilation is inevitable. The emotional detachment behind those concepts chilled even Dooku. There was no hatred, no arrogance, only certainty refined across millions of years. To the precursors, civilizations existed as forests existed to lumberjacks. Resources awaiting harvest. Anakin ignited his lightsaber. Obi-Wan stepped beside him. Mace Windu raised his violet blade while Yoda's green saber flashed to life with ancient resolve. Across from them, Count Dooku slowly activated his crimson weapon. For one extraordinary moment, Jedi and Sith stood united, not because centuries of conflict had ended, but because extinction had rendered philosophy irrelevant. The battle that followed surpassed every conflict of the Clone Wars. Lightsabers clashed against living energy fields capable of rewriting matter itself. Entire sections of terrain folded into impossible geometries as the precursors manipulated dimensional physics. Force waves collided with gravitational distortions that shattered mountains. Clone commandos fought desperately beneath giants whose footsteps created localized earthquakes while starfighters dueled colossal airborne organisms among skies woven from biological lightning. Yet even amid unimaginable destruction, Anakin sensed something deeper. The command nexus. It coordinated everything. Destroy? And every breach would collapse. But doing so would unleash an energy surge powerful enough to consume everyone still inside the dimensional realm. Victory demanded sacrifice. No other path remained. As the living world beneath their feet began channeling impossible amounts of dimensional energy toward every active breach across two universes, the strike force realized the final decision had arrived. The fate of the galaxy now depended not upon defeating monsters, but upon deciding who would remain behind to ensure that the gateway between realities closed forever. The destruction of the final Omega breach did not end with a triumphant celebration. It ended with silence. Across thousands of Republic and Separatist command bridges, officers stared through reinforced transparasteel viewports toward a region of space that moments earlier had contained the largest dimensional wound the galaxy had ever witnessed. Now there was only a slowly collapsing storm of blue-white gravitational energy fading into the darkness. No new kaiju emerged. No impossible alien world remained visible beyond the fractured boundary between realities. The dimensional corridor that had linked two universes together had finally collapsed under the combined sacrifice of Jedi, Sith, clones, droids, and soldiers who, only weeks earlier, had been sworn enemies. For the first time since the Clone Wars began, countless star systems experienced something they had nearly forgotten. Victory, however, came wrapped in grief so immense that no government could measure it. Hundreds of worlds had suffered attacks before the breaches were sealed forever. Entire coastal continents lay buried beneath shattered oceans. Mountain ranges had been carved apart by Category V kaiju whose footsteps alone had triggered earthquakes powerful enough to split planetary crusts. Once thriving frontier colonies had become abandoned memorials where twisted skeletons of Republic walkers and Separatist battle tanks remained frozen beneath layers of crystallized kaiju blood that glowed faintly beneath alien moons. Even worlds that had escaped direct attack would remember the months when every ocean became a possible gateway for extinction itself. Coruscant transformed almost overnight. The capital remained untouched physically, but emotionally the center of the Republic had changed forever. Endless refugee convoys filled orbital traffic lanes as survivors from devastated Outer Rim sectors arrived carrying little more than personal belongings and memories of cities that no longer existed. Senate plazas once dedicated to political debate became humanitarian distribution centers where clone troopers worked beside relief volunteers rather than preparing for another offensive against separatist worlds. Children who had grown up fearing battle droids now drew enormous monsters with impossible jaws and glowing blue blood. The galaxy's nightmares had acquired entirely new shapes. Kamino emerged as one of the unexpected symbols of survival. The ocean world that had nearly fallen beneath repeated kaiju assaults became the birthplace of an entirely different military philosophy. Engineers who had spent months designing anti-kaiju weaponry now adapted those technologies for peaceful purposes. Massive orbital stabilization platforms originally created to repel Category V organisms became planetary defense grids capable of shielding vulnerable colonies from asteroid impacts and natural disasters. Clone veterans who had survived the Breach War trained new generations of officers whose doctrines focused not merely on defeating intelligent enemies but on responding rapidly to existential threats beyond conventional warfare. Every lesson had been purchased with extraordinary sacrifice. Across former Separatist territory, recovery proved far more complicated. Entire corporate alliances had collapsed after losing industrial sectors to kaiju attacks. Countless droid foundries remained silent, their production lines buried beneath collapsed infrastructure or flooded coastlines. Many neutral systems that had once supported the Confederacy quietly abandoned dreams of independence, recognizing that political divisions had nearly doomed every civilization when the breaches first appeared. Even former Separatist commanders found themselves cooperating openly with Republic reconstruction teams because no world possessed sufficient resources to rebuild alone. Among the Jedi Order, the consequences reached even deeper than physical destruction. Ancient certainty had disappeared forever. Throughout thousands of years, the Jedi had believed the Force flowed through every living thing and that enough wisdom could eventually reveal every threat confronting the galaxy. The Kaiju invasion had shattered that confidence. The Force had never abandoned them, yet its visions had remained fragmented because the Precursors and their bioengineered titans existed outside the natural history that had shaped galactic life. Many masters began studying forgotten philosophies concerning the living force, cosmic balance, and the possibility that reality itself extended far beyond anything the Order had imagined. Humility replaced certainty. Curiosity replaced complacency. Yoda spent long hours meditating upon those revelations. The ancient Grand Master understood that victory had not come because the Jedi possessed greater power than the Precursors. Victory had come because enemies who despised one another had chosen cooperation over destruction. That lesson echoed through every chamber of the Jedi Temple more powerfully than any military triumph. The Force, he realized, did not guarantee easy answers. It offered opportunities for beings to choose unity when fear demanded division. Anakin Skywalker carried different scars. He had crossed into another universe, witnessed civilizations that engineered monsters as casually as the Republic manufactured starfighters, and confronted enemies immune to intimidation, diplomacy, or compassion. The experience hardened him while simultaneously deepening his determination to protect those unable to defend themselves. Obi-Wan noticed subtle changes in his former Padawan. Recklessness remained, but it had matured into calculated courage rather than youthful impulse. Ahsoka, too, emerged transformed, no longer viewing warfare merely as battles between opposing armies but as the desperate responsibility of preserving civilization itself when unimaginable darkness arrived. Elsewhere, Mandalorian clans gained renewed respect across the galaxy after their fearless defense of countless refugee evacuations. Bounty hunters who had once fought solely for credits became celebrated heroes on worlds where their ships rescued civilians abandoned by retreating fleets. Smugglers who ignored Republic laws during the Clone Wars found themselves honored because those same skills had allowed humanitarian convoys to reach isolated systems cut off by kaiju attacks. Even several Hutt cartels discovered that stability produced greater prosperity than endless exploitation, leading to unexpected commercial agreements that endured long after the fighting ceased. Only one individual viewed the breach war through an entirely different lens. Palpatine stood within his private office overlooking the endless skyline of Coruscant, watching reconstruction vessels drift between towers scarred by emergency defense installations. Publicly, he had become the indispensable wartime chancellor who united the Republic against extinction itself. Emergency powers originally granted to coordinate anti-kaiju defenses remained firmly in his hands because few senators wished to dismantle centralized authority while entire sectors still recovered from devastation. Citizens frightened by memories of monsters emerging from dimensional storms welcomed stronger security, larger fleets, expanded surveillance, and greater military coordination. Fear accomplished what years of political manipulation alone had struggled to achieve. The irony amused him. The Precursors had failed to conquer the galaxy, yet they had unknowingly accelerated his own ascent toward absolute power. Soon, he believed, only a unified empire could guarantee civilization would never again face such vulnerability. Whether that empire served peace or tyranny mattered little to him. History would remember only survival. Far beyond the restored hyperspace lanes, beyond every Republic observatory and navigation beacon, the darkness between galaxies remained silent once more. Yet silence did not necessarily mean emptiness. In forgotten corners of wild space, explorers occasionally reported strange gravitational fluctuations lasting only seconds before vanishing. Deep beneath the oceans of abandoned colony worlds, mysterious organic minerals continued emitting faint electromagnetic pulses that scientists could neither explain nor replicate. A handful of sealed research vaults guarded fragments of kaiju biology preserved for study under the strictest security imaginable. Officially, every specimen remained inactive. Officially, among spacer legends whispered inside remote cantinas, pilots told impossible stories of hearing distant roars echo across hyperspace during unusually violent storms. Most dismissed those tales as trauma born from war. Others quietly altered their flight paths anyway. The galaxy had defeated giants born beyond reality itself. But legends possess remarkable endurance. Generations later, children would listen in awe as veterans described oceans that split apart beneath monsters taller than mountains, fleets that fought beside former enemies against impossible odds, and Jedi who crossed into another universe to save countless worlds. Historians would argue endlessly over strategy, politics, and military doctrine. Artists would paint impossible battles where Venator star destroyers dueled creatures the size of cities beneath skies torn open by glowing dimensional scars. They would call it many things. The Breach War. The War of Giants. The days the oceans opened. Yet among those who had survived its darkest moments, one name endured above all others. The war when an entire galaxy discovered that even the Force could not prepare civilization for everything waiting beyond the stars. And because of that terrible lesson, the Star Wars galaxy would never again mistake peace for safety, nor assume that the greatest threats always came from within. Some horrors arrived from realities no one had ever imagined. And somewhere beyond the infinite darkness separating universes, other civilizations still gazed toward distant stars, wondering what waited on the other side. The answer, as history had now proven, could change everything. The Clone Wars ended, but not in the way anyone had imagined. The Republic had survived not because one side defeated another, but because the entire galaxy was forced to recognize a terrifying truth. Political rivalries, ancient grudges, and ideological wars meant nothing when faced with an enemy that viewed every living being as nothing more than biological material waiting to be harvested. For a brief moment in history, Jedi fought beside Sith, clone troopers beside battle droids, Mandalorians beside smugglers, and even the Hutts chose survival over profit. The galaxy endured because civilization itself became more important than victory. Yet the cost of that lesson would echo for generations. Thousands of worlds carried permanent scars where kaiju had reshaped coastlines, shattered cities, and turned thriving colonies into monuments of sacrifice. Veterans who had survived the Breach War spent the rest of their lives haunted not by battle droids or lightsabers, but by memories of mountains that moved, oceans that opened, and creatures so vast they blotted out entire horizons. Their stories became legend, inspiring future generations while reminding them that the greatest dangers often arrive from beyond everything civilization believes it understands. The Jedi emerged wiser but humbler, no longer believing the Force revealed every mystery of existence. The Republic emerged stronger but also more centralized, setting political changes into motion that would reshape galactic history forever. Hidden in the shadows, Palpatine quietly continued his ascent toward absolute power, convinced that fear of another invasion would make the galaxy embrace an empire promising eternal security. As for the Precursors, the dimensional network had collapsed, and their invasion had failed. But throughout wild space, strange gravitational disturbances continued to appear without explanation. Explorers occasionally reported impossible energy readings that vanished before they could be investigated. Perhaps the breaches had truly been sealed forever. Or perhaps somewhere beyond reality, another civilization had already begun looking toward a galaxy that had proven far more difficult to conquer than expected.
The multiverse doesn't end here. New invasions, new empires, and new worlds collide daily. If you enjoy deep cinematic, what-if scenarios like this, subscribe and join Multiverse Galaxy if